Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com.
Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome.
Today, we go to the Heights outside Santiago de Cuba in the Spanish-American War for the story of San Juan Heights. A longer version of this feature, with fact sheets and photos, is available in the print edition on LinkedIn or by email.
The grass in front of San Juan Heights was waist-high and full of hidden wire, and every stalk seemed to twitch under rifle fire. Just after midday on July 1st, 1898, American soldiers lay pressed into the ground outside Santiago de Cuba, listening to the snap of Spanish Mauser bullets and the strained voices of officers trying to be heard in the chaos.
Ahead of them, beyond a shallow creek and tangled wire, blockhouses and trenches lined the ridge that newspapers would call San Juan Hill. Spanish soldiers fired from cover, while American units hugged the low ground with no clear path forward. The ridge looked close and impossible at the same time. Standing up meant running into fire. Staying down meant letting casualties mount.
The uniforms in that killing zone told a complicated story. Sun-faded blue marked regular cavalry and infantry. Rough khaki and mismatched gear marked the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, the regiment the press had already named the Rough Riders. Nearby, black regulars of the 9th and 10th Cavalry pushed forward with the hard experience of years on frontier posts and patrols. On that ground, all of them were assault troops, trying to move under fire.
The regulars and volunteers did not arrive on equal terms in the public imagination. The volunteers had the romance of a new regiment and famous names attached to them. The regulars had years of hard service and fewer reporters watching. On the field, those differences mattered less than the immediate problem of moving forward under fire. But they would matter a great deal when the story was told afterward.
Bugle calls overlapped, orders crossed, and the attack stalled. Men could see puffs of smoke from Spanish rifles, hear rounds slicing through grass, and feel the helplessness of lying still while the ridge remained in enemy hands. The plan had imagined a more orderly advance. Modern firepower shredded that idea in real time.
Junior officers and sergeants began shouting for their men to rise and move. They were not thinking about future headlines or speeches. They were trying to break a deadly pause before the entire assault was shot apart in the open. The decision to run toward that ridge turned confusion into one of the most remembered charges in American military history. But in the moment, it was simply the only way out.
San Juan Heights mattered because it dominated the eastern approaches to Santiago and the roads leading toward the harbor, where Spain's Caribbean fleet waited. If Spanish troops held the heights, they could watch American movements, direct fire on the siege lines, and threaten the campaign around the city. If the Americans could take the ridge, they would tighten the pressure on Santiago and help force the issue on land and sea.
The tactical problem was simple to describe and difficult to solve. The Americans needed the high ground to close on Santiago, but the defenders had the advantage of elevation, prepared cover, modern rifles, and clear fields of fire. Every yard gained across the low ground had to be bought before the real climb even began.
This was the key land battle of a short war with long consequences. The United States had sent troops to Cuba to break Spain's hold and support a Cuban rebellion already worn by years of fighting. Around Santiago, regular infantry, black cavalry troopers, and hastily organized volunteers found themselves crowded into the same narrow approach. The mix was improvised, and the conditions were unforgiving. The Rough Riders brought political attention and press coverage because Theodore Roosevelt served under Leonard Wood in the regiment. Their story was colorful and easy to print.
The 9th and 10th Cavalry brought discipline, fieldcraft, and the burden of serving a nation that still denied them equal treatment at home. Their climb carried both professional pride and the risk that their part would later be overlooked.
For Spanish commanders, the Heights offered a chance to make the Americans pay heavily and perhaps stiffen Spain's position. For American leaders, success promised more than the capture of a Cuban city. It would show that the United States could land forces overseas, coordinate Army and Navy operations, and win in front of a global audience. The men in the grass had not chosen those stakes, but their actions would shape them.
The road to San Juan Heights began long before the firing started. The black troopers of the 9th and 10th had spent years in harsh service on the borderlands and plains, escorting wagon trains, scouting, and fighting in difficult country. That experience built small unit trust between many officers and their men, even as the larger army remained marked by segregation and prejudice.
The volunteers formed almost overnight. The first United States volunteer cavalry drew cowboys, athletes, miners, and political allies into a single formation. Under Wood and Roosevelt, they drilled quickly in Texas and Florida, trying to turn individual courage into coordinated action. Newspapers loved them before they saw combat. Cuba, however, stripped away romance. Horses were left behind because of shipping limits. Equipment was uneven, and tropical disease stalked the camps.
The larger Santiago campaign was shaped by uneven preparation. Intelligence about Spanish positions was incomplete, maps were crude, and supply lines from the landing at Daiquiri were strained. Units were short of food, medical support, and heavy ammunition. Commanders debated caution against speed, but disease and climate made delay dangerous. Pressure to act pushed the army toward a direct advance on the Heights.
Disease was another silent pressure behind the decision to attack. In Cuba, heat, exposure, and sickness could weaken an army as surely as enemy fire. Commanders knew that waiting for perfect conditions might mean watching their own force decline in the camps and along the roads. That urgency helped push the operation toward a direct assault before the expedition lost strength.
When the attack began, it did not unfold in clean waves. American artillery fired on the blockhouses and trenches, but the guns were too light to silence the defenders. As units moved through jungle, trails, and open ground, formations tangled together. The 9th and 10th Cavalry advanced near the Rough Riders and other regiments, bending around thickets, streams, and wire while trying to follow flags, bugles, and shouted orders. Soon the assault stalled in the low ground. Spanish fire swept the approaches with a sharper, flatter crack than many soldiers had expected from older rifle warfare. Bullets clipped grass, snapped past ears, and struck the earth with little warning. Officers on horseback became obvious targets, and many went down early. The problem was not a lack of courage. It was accurate modern fire, combined with confusion about who should move and where. This was one of the hard lessons of the battle. Courage could put men into the field, but courage alone could not make bullets less accurate or orders less confused. The American line needed movement, cover, leadership, and supporting fire. Without those pieces coming together, bravery risked becoming only exposure.
The fight began to turn when men refused to stay pinned. Black troopers of the 10th Cavalry pushed forward in scattered groups, using folds in the ground and scraps of cover. Their movement gave nearby units something to follow. Rough Riders saw regulars moving and rose in short rushes of their own. One group sprinted, dropped, fired, and rose again. Then another did the same. The advance became less a neat line than a shared decision. Men from different regiments shouted encouragement, waved hats, and pointed toward the ridge. Non-commissioned officers tried to keep direction, but the essential motion was forward. Under Spanish fire, Scattered pushes began to overlap until they formed a general surge toward Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill. A detachment of American Gatling guns helped break the deadlock. Unlike the earlier artillery, those hand-cranked machine guns could keep steady fire on the blockhouses and trenches. Their bullets did not empty the ridge, but they made it far more dangerous for Spanish riflemen to expose themselves. For the attackers below, that covering fire created precious seconds when movement felt possible. The Gatling guns were not modern machine guns in the later 20th century sense, but their effect on morale and suppression was important. Their steady fire told the men below that the ridge was not untouchable. It also reminded the Spanish defenders that the attackers had more than rifles and willpower working in their favor. On the slopes, the final advance came in short, desperate rushes. Buffalo soldiers, Rough Riders, and other regulars and volunteers rose from shallow cover, sprinted a few yards, and dropped again to breathe and fire upslope. Men who had not trained together shared canteens, cartridges, and quick words before the next push. Unit labels mattered less than reaching the crest before the attack lost momentum.
When the assault reached the Spanish line, it did so in overlapping wedges of exhausted men rather than one perfect wave. Small groups entered portions of the trenches almost at the same time, trading close fire and forcing defenders to choose between holding or falling back. Some Spanish soldiers fought hard, others withdrew to secondary positions. Americans planted flags, reorganized as best they could, and turned captured blockhouses into temporary strongpoints.
The heights were not secured in a single instant. Fire from nearby positions continued to strike the hilltops, and the troops on the crest still had to sort themselves out under pressure. But the psychological balance had shifted. Men who had spent the morning pinned below could now look outward from the ridge. The ground that had dominated them was finally in American hands.
Tactically, that mattered immediately. From San Juan Heights, American observers could watch roads, adjust artillery, and tighten the siege around Santiago. Within days, the Spanish fleet attempted to break out of the harbor and was destroyed by American warships offshore. The fall of Santiago and the loss of the fleet helped bring the war to a close within weeks.
The broader result was enormous. A short conflict had helped move the United States from continental power to overseas actor, leaving it in possession of new territories and newly aware of its reach. For many Americans reading newspapers at home, the charge up San Juan Hill became the symbol of that shift. Paintings, speeches, and reunion stories turned the ridge into a national image.
For the men who climbed it, the memory was more complicated. The Rough Riders and Roosevelt received much of the public credit because the press had already built their story. Black regulars of the 9th and 10th Cavalry, whose steady movement and discipline were crucial to the success, were often muted or ignored in early accounts. Within the Army, many officers understood that the victory had been shared, but public recognition did not fall evenly.
That uneven memory is part of why the battle still deserves careful handling. It is possible to recognize Roosevelt's visibility and the Rough Riders' courage, while also restoring the regulars, especially the Buffalo Soldiers, to the center of the action. The more complete story is not less dramatic, it is more accurate, and it honors more of the men who made the victory possible.
San Juan Heights also hinted at the warfare to come. Smokeless rifles, entrenched defenders, poor maps, unclear orders, and crowded approaches all foreshadowed larger and bloodier battles in the 20th century. The fight also exposed the contradiction of black soldiers serving bravely for a flag that did not yet treat them equally. It was both a military lesson and a mirror held up to the nation.
Today, serious study of San Juan Heights looks beyond a single famous figure and sees a mixed line of regulars, volunteers, black and white soldiers, veterans, and newcomers, all moving through the same fire. Headline moments in military history rarely belong to one regiment or one personality. They are built by many hands, machine gunners cranking weapons, sergeants pushing squads forward, officers trying to restore order, and exhausted soldiers refusing to stay penned.
When we study that climb under the Cuban sun, we see pride, sacrifice, courage, and unfinished business together. San Juan Heights remains important because it shows how a short battle can cast a long shadow over race, recognition,